there's lots of news. Today was, frankly, slightly nutballs in Washington. I mean, there's always a lot going on at once. But today, there was a lot that was sort of pushing the envelope. Today, the House Judiciary Committee, for example, voted to authorize subpoenas to Jared Kushner, to former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, to former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, to Trump's now awaiting sentencing National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, to Trump's old campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, also David Pecker from the National Enquirer, and an editor there as well. These are guys who helped the president with his hush money payments to cover up alleged affairs before the election. Also, a lawyer involved in those payments, a lawyer named Keith Davidson, he's also being subpoenaed. Of course, Michael Cohen was the other lawyer who was involved in those hush money payments, too, but he's already serving federal prison time for his role in them. Also, Jeff Sessions' chief of staff, Jody Hunt, who is still at the Justice Department and who has been the man at the center of this huge debacle for the Trump administration over this census thing, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. Jody Hunt has been subpoenaed as well, as has Rob Porter, who was gently nudged out of the Trump White House after serious domestic violence allegations from both of his ex-wives, put a little flesh on the bones of the story as to why he couldn't get a security clearance, despite the fact that you really kind of need one if you're going to be staff secretary to President of the United States. So all in all, a nice bunch subpoenaed today by the Judiciary Committee. Or a nice bunch whose subpoenas have been authorized today by the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee has been sort of plodding along in this very deliberate process of requesting testimony and then demanding it, and then still not getting it, and then demanding it some more, and then ultimately making noises about how someday they'll win all of this in court. These new subpoenas are part of that slow roll from the Judiciary Committee, but they also represent an interesting escalation in terms of who they're targeting and how close those targets are to the president. Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler now has been authorized to send those subpoenas to each of these 12 guys at will whenever he wants to send them. We'll see when he does it, and we'll see whether we really are going to see any of these guys in the witness chair in an open, televised hearing finally have to answer questions. But here's an interesting twist. The other subpoenas that Jerry Nadler was authorized to send out today, in addition to the 12 people related to these allegations of obstruction of justice, potential corruption, potential abuse of power by the president, the other subpoenas he was authorized to send out today are about the Trump policy of taking kids away from their parents and their other family members at the border. We reported earlier this week on a trove of significant incident reports detailing alleged mistreatment of kids in custody at a Border Patrol facility in Yuma, Arizona. You may remember one of the things we reported was a detailed claim by a 15-year-old girl that she was sexually assaulted by a uniformed officer inside that facility. And although the significant incident report about that alleged sexual assault by a uniformed officer was filed with the Trump administration more than a month ago, it was filed with HHS, a case manager from Health and Human Services, filled out and filed that significant incident report in early June. Nevertheless, there's been no indication that that matter was ever followed up. There was no indication that that matter was ever investigated after this girl came forward to formally report it. There's no indication that matter was ever looked into until NBC News obtained and published that incident report earlier this week and called CBP for comment. Now, finally, CBP says that matter is being investigated. Today, the chief Border Patrol official in charge of that facility gave an interview to a local public radio reporter in Arizona named Victor Calderon, in which Calderon questioned him about the abuse allegation involving that facility that he runs in Yuma.
Has there been a chance for training for guards and agents, or is it sort of a, just do the best you can every day?
We're not, child care professionals, I would say that, but in terms of detention and transport and those things, we are trained for that.
We're not child care professionals. We're not trained for that, This is the man running a facility that has been holding hundreds of kids apart from their parents, apart from any adult relatives, holding kids alone, dozens of them crammed into cells for days, crammed in there so tightly they have to take turns sleeping because there's only enough room to lie down if other people stand up. He's been running a facility where at least one of the kids say that the officers there took away the mats on which the kids were allowed to sleep as punishment for their complaining about the chlorine in the water, making it too difficult to drink. We're not child care professionals. We're not trained for that. So today, on the child separation policy in general, the Judiciary Committee was authorized to start subpoenaing the Trump administration for records and documents about that policy and about the ongoing practice of taking little kids away from their parents. Today, on the Yuma, Arizona allegations specifically, a key oversight committee in the House announced that they are opening an investigation into allegations of physical and sexual abuse of migrant children by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol officers. This is a direct result of NBC's reporting this week. As a first step, the committee says they want all the significant incident reports that describe allegations of abuse of these kids by Homeland Security Department staff. NBC reporter Julia Ainsley, who worked on this story with Jacob Soboroff, said this week that while NBC's reporting this week was based on nearly 30 of these significant incident reports that NBC News obtained, she said that there are believed to be many, many, many other significant incident reports, in addition to the 30 or so that NBC saw. Now that reporting has caused Congress to demand to see all of them that allege any sort of abuse. So Congress should be able to get those. Brace yourself for that. Tomorrow, we're expecting more than 750 vigils and protests around the country under the banner Lights for Liberty. These are going to be protests against how the Trump administration has been abusing and mistreating immigrants in their custody. Most of the protests are going to be physically right outside detention centers where immigrants and immigrant kids are being held. These vigils and rallies and protests are going to be held outside the actual Border Patrol stations and the ICE facilities that are holding people. One of these vigils that is planned for tomorrow is outside that Yuma, Arizona facility that we've been reporting on all week. That one in Yuma is expected to be a large event at 7 o'clock local time tomorrow night. But again, we're expecting hundreds of these vigils and protests tomorrow, these Lights for Liberty events. And this comes as the Trump administration is once again threatening that they are imminently about to start rounding up immigrants and their families all over the country. And that, of course, has been a repeated recent threat, including from the president himself, just over the last several weeks. And to be honest with you, we do not know if the new threats today, that this is imminently about to happen, we don't know if these new threats from the administration are more realistic or more serious than all the previous threats that have come and gone from them. But, I mean, if their aim here is to try to rattle people, certainly they are succeeding. If their aim here is to try to scare immigrant communities and to try to anger people who are upset about the way the Trump administration has treated immigrants, if they're trying to do that, it's working. Immigration officials announced that these raids this weekend would target 10 major U.S. cities: Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Denver, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New Orleans, New York, and San Francisco. The mayors of many of those cities are now speaking out publicly, saying that they're going to do what they can to block these supposedly impending raids, to try to protect immigrant communities in these large cities. The mayor of Chicago, for example, Lori Lightfoot, announced today that not only would her city's police not cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement in any of these raids, but she announced that Chicago had cut off ICE from having access to any Chicago police databases. And she said that cutoff will remain permanent. Houston's Mayor Sylvester Turner told NPR today that his city's police will also not participate and not cooperate in any federal raids. And that, quote, "We are advising people that they have due process rights. They do not have to answer the door. They do not have to let anybody into their homes." In New York, both the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York State told immigrant families today that the city and the state would help them fight for their rights, and offered phone numbers to call for anybody approached by federal immigration agents. And so these mayors and some governors and local officials who are blocking access to police databases and telling local police departments and city police departments not to cooperate, and they're offering legal advice to immigrant communities, making clear that ICE is not welcome in their cities, these local officials who are doing what they feel they can, I mean, I think some of the consternation about these threats of imminent raids is about the fact that the Trump administration seems to be such a chaos machine on this. I mean, they have multiply threatened these raids, and so nobody knows if today's announcement that the raids are going to happen is just another threat or if it means that the threats might really happen. And if they are going to happen, why are they announcing them in advance anyway? I mean, even today, announcing these 10 cities where raids would take place Right after they announced the list of 10 cities, like immediately after, ICE then confirmed to the city of New Orleans that actually, even though New Orleans was one of the 10 cities on the list, all immigration enforcement is going to be temporarily suspended in New Orleans because of the huge freaking tropical storm that's bearing down on the city and about to become a hurricane and already causing flooding. It'll be a hurricane by the time it makes landfall this weekend. And so maybe the federal government planning a gigantic immigration roundup in the middle of that in New Orleans was not a brilliant idea, but maybe the federal government didn't notice the weather forecast until today. So they announced New Orleans as one of the 10 cities and then immediately announced, no, New Orleans, not you. Now they've changed their plans. But maybe, did they have the plans anyway in the first place? Is it comforting or disconcerting to see the federal government this confused and this incompetent in even planning something this controversial and offensive? So today, the mayor of New Orleans found herself having to reassure immigrants in her city that they could safely evacuate the city if they want to, without fear that they might be stopped by federal immigration agents on their way out. She told residents, quote, safety first. And a part of that safety, which is a priority for the city of New Orleans, is supporting the fact that ICE will not, repeat, will not have a presence in the city of New Orleans. But in the midst of this chaos and demonstrated incompetence, there's obviously real concern over what might be about to happen. The White House has obviously been trying to stoke as much fear and confusion as possible. Part of their MO here seems to be that the worse you treat immigrants, the more you demonstrate cruelty toward immigrant communities, the more you try to terrify people, the better that is for the country somehow. The more pain and fear you can instill in immigrant communities, somehow that redounds to the White House's benefit. That seems to be their calculus. In the midst of this confusion and the ongoing threats from the administration about these supposedly impending roundups, local immigrant rights groups and national organizations, including the ACLU, have been trying in advance of these raids to teach people about their rights. Basic stuff like if immigrants come to your door, do not open the door. You are not legally required to let them in unless they have a warrant. Quote, ask why they are there. If you don't speak English, you have the right to have an interpreter. Quote, you have the right to remain silent. Quote, you are entitled to speak to a lawyer. Local ACLU chapters and local immigrant rights groups are blasting out rapid response hotlines to call if you're confronted by federal agents. And the National ACLU has filed a preemptive lawsuit attempting to ensure that any immigrants who are rounded up by ICE are afforded a detention hearing, before being summarily deported.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.